Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book-loving, notebook-hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology and leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading and notebooks and writing, mixed in with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. You can expect regular weekly episodes focused on 3 books you need to know about on a bookish theme and how to bring those themes to life in our actual lives too. You can also expect author interviews, notebooking inspiration, and topics to help us grow through what we go through and take inspired action to make our lives better. So grab a notebook and your TBR list and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Get Literate podcast. I'm Stephanie, and this isn't an ordinary episode. Why not? Today marks the 100th episode of the podcast. 100 episodes. Back when I first had the idea for this podcast, I knew I'd be consistent and I knew I would keep it up. That's the upholder in me. But thinking about the 100th episode anniversary, it felt like it would never get here. And now here it is. I'm so excited to have a celebratory episode today. So when I think back to when I started the podcast, I started it back in 2022. It actually started out of a need to pivot. So if you were with me way back then, you know that I would send weekly literate love out into the world. Every week, every Friday, I would send an email that talked about what I was reading, writing, learning, and loving over the course of the week. I sent it out to my email list and I also posted it on my blog so that others who could find me could see what I was all about and dig into some of my archives if you liked some of the things that I was reading and writing and you wanted to make them your own. It was my favorite activity of the week, and quite frankly, it held me accountable for the kind of reading and writing life I wanted to have. I mean, if I didn't do my reading and writing for the week, then I couldn't write my email to share it with you. And so while I loved sharing with everyone expecting me to share also fueled my own reading and writing in really wonderful ways. But then I started dealing with some health issues, lots of joint pain, things that were taking me away from the computer. I just couldn't type the way that I used to. And so I needed to pivot. And so the idea for the podcast actually came out of a need to pivot. I didn't want to give up my weekly Literate Love emails. I didn't want to give up the other blog posts that I would post maybe once or twice a month. But I also couldn't do them the way that I had before. Podcast, however, is a little bit different. There is very little typing other than the show notes. And instead, I just press record and I talk instead. It seemed like a win-win situation to give me a chance to save my most favorite practice of the week and maybe give me a chance to explore something new too. So the Get Literate podcast was born as a way to share my weekly literate love. But I also wanted to share more than that on the podcast. I wanted to talk about my love of books, specifically how I use them to grow through what I go through. Now, if you've been listening for a while, you know that I love all sorts of book lists for all sorts of reasons. Those lists can be serious, like books to read when you get a diagnosis, books to read when you need to change your life, books to help you through loss, right? Those are big issues that offer a kind of bibliotherapy to help us grow through things. But you also know that I like some whimsical lists too. Books about cake, books that will send you to the stationery store, right? So I loved putting those collections of books out into the world, in addition to talking about what I was reading and writing and learning. But here's the best part. the podcast has completely transformed into something else. What started off as a way to talk about books on a weekly basis has changed significantly. Now, yes, I still talk about books. In fact, every other episode is dedicated to a book collection. I alternate between episodes focused on reading and episodes focused on writing. And sometimes those are book lists, sometimes those are writing ideas, and sometimes those are authors coming to talk about their books or other bookish friends that can just make our literate lives better. Quite honestly, I didn't see all of that coming. I really thought this was going to be a podcast sharing the books that I've read, and instead, it has broadened my own reading and writing life, and quite frankly, my life in general. If you are someone who loves picture books, then you might know a picture book called Circles All Around Us by Brad Montague. I adore this picture book. I also adore Brad Montague's work because he was the creator of Kid President, videos that put a smile on my face often. And in this book, Brad Montague likens our growth in the world as a series of nested circles. So when we are first born, we have this teeny tiny tight little circle around us as we just interact with our immediate caregivers. But as we grow, our circles grow too. We meet new family members, we meet new friends, we have new experiences like going to school and taking on new hobbies. And slowly, we have to draw bigger circles for ourselves to welcome everything in. I feel like this podcast has been a circle grower for me. How's that for a highly technical term? I feel like this podcast has grown my own reading and writing life in pretty significant ways, but it's also just made my entire life better. When I think about what it has accomplished, I just feel like I have to pinch myself that I get to do this on a weekly basis and share it with the world. Number one, I have read more books than I ever thought I would read. And not only have I read more books, but I've read books that I didn't even know existed. I've learned about authors who I didn't know existed, genres and characters and locations, and all of the things that I have found in a page of the book that, unless I did this podcast and really push myself to learn about them and stretch myself to have a more diverse reading life, I wouldn't have known about them. And some of those books have been quite life-changing. The same goes for writing. Yes, I have always been a writer and a notebooker, but putting that notebooking habit out for public reflection has been wonderful because people write in and tell me about their notebooks and their writing prompts. And I push myself to do some sort of new writing every week, every other week, so that I have something to share for my monthly Literate Love episodes. So I've just really pushed the boundaries of my own reading and writing, and I've grappled with questions about them and how that matters to my actual life. But I've done it now in a community of other people who are doing the same. And it's been fantastic. When I think about the authors that I have had a chance to talk to, that truly blows my mind. Just this year on the Get Literate podcast alone, I've talked to Terry Brown, author of Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, An Enemy Like Me, and coming out soon, Daughters of Green Mountain Gap. Not only was she the first author I had on the podcast, but she's also become a great friend ever since we hit it off in that episode. I've talked to Emily Winslow, who wrote this beautiful nonfiction book called Time to Write. That episode actually gave me the confidence to join NaNoWriMo, right, National Novel Writing Month, and start to put pen to paper for a middle grade novel. I talked to J.D. Sparrow, who is a local author who has written multiple books that have just captured my curiosity. And not only that, but I've also gotten to take, as a result of knowing her from the podcast, writing workshop with her and meeting her in person and pushing my own writing life forward too. I got to speak with Sagit Swartz, who wrote the amazing book Since She's Been Gone, the first novel I had ever known about and actually probably the first novel ever whose main character has an eating disorder. It's not the sole purpose of the book. It is couched in this amazing, enthralling kind of mystery and family drama. But not only was I able to learn from that book, but I was also able to connect with her on a personal level too. Like these connections from these authors, when I read their words, they become connected to me, right? They may not know it, but we become friends because we've shared the reading experience. Getting to talk to them in person is just the most amazing gift. I also talked with Laura Maxwell talking about her debut novel, never ever realizing that I wanted to learn about the sinking of the Andrea Doria, right? And it sparked so much curiosity. And Megan Tatey, author of Super Bloom, one of the amazing Zibby authors I have come to know and love, taught me about super blooms, gave me this wonderful book about second chances and taking risks. And I got to talk to all of them in person. It's amazing. But that's not all. I also talked to two children's literature authors, James Preller, who has written a bazillion books, books like the Exit 13 series, the Jigsaw Jones series. I'm sure you know of at least one of his books. And Anne Braden, one of my favorite middle grade authors who wrote The Benefits of Being an Octopus, Flight of the Puffin, and her most recent one, oh my goodness, it's escaping me. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm forgetting this. And of course, I'm recording. But anyway, three amazing middle grade novels. Benefits of Being an Octopus, hands down, probably my all-time favorite. Those conversations led me to realize that I actually wanted a second podcast. I wanted an excuse to meet and talk to a children's literature author every week too. And I started that. I started the Kid Lit Love podcast in late 2023, and I have been doing just that. So not only has the Get Literate podcast brought me so much author love, but it's brought me a second podcast where I just keep on going and I keep meeting even more authors. Just as exciting as the authors, though, are all of the bookish people I have met. Bookish people, notebookish people, creative people. Hands down, I think one of my favorite connections is Christy Zimmer. She is the amazing guided journaler who has these beautiful, colorful pages that just invite you to reflect on the page. We have not only stayed in touch, but she has made some wonderful printables for my community, like the Reading Rules printable. If you don't know that, you'll be able to find that in the show notes. And she's even designed some things for me to use as part of my monthly Literate Love envelopes. I got to speak with Deborah Glantz, who makes those amazingly beautiful repurposed book trees. Jen Begin, who does joyful junk journaling, who actually spent some time with my Patreon community, convincing us that we too could junk journal. And in fact, we did. And that creativity was just, that was fun. That was something I didn't think I could do. And turns out I did. Jen Lafine was here. She is this amazing mindset coach, and she walked us through journaling our way to a better tomorrow with some really insightful journaling prompts. Ellen Lumpkin Brown taught me how to sew. We talked about creativity and how she brings creativity workshops to the library, sometimes sparked by books that she's read. And in my community, we actually sewed a weighted face mask. Yes, it's actually in my freezer as we speak. Wendy Reed is a fellow educator, and she put herself on the path to self-publishing and has been doing so with gusto and success. And she joined us on the podcast to talk about how. But I also got to meet other fellow bloggers, Allison from Mind Joggle, who was leading a really unique reading challenge in 2023, and Jules Bonono, who is the blogger of The Literary Lifestyle and who focuses on the Rory Gilmore Book Club. Now, I also talked to Becca Ray Eagle, who talked about joyful one-word journaling, which is something you know I love to talk about, one-word journals, one-word themes. Anna K. Morris was more of a recent guest. She is also a mindset coach. She taught me about anchor feelings, and those anchored feelings literally saved the holiday. And I also got to talk to Sarah Hart Unger, who was a wish list guest. I adore her podcast, Best Laid Plans. She talks all about planning, really indulges her love of good paper and special pens. And we formed a really great connection on that episode too. I mean, I would not have had these conversations. I would not have had these experiences. None of it would have happened if it weren't for the 100 episodes of this podcast. So I am here to say thank you. Thank you to all of the authors who have been on the podcast. Thank you to all of the bookish and notebookish people who have recorded episodes to share their passion. And thank you to all of you who are listening. This podcast wouldn't be possible without people pushing play every week and then sharing what they think. It has been an amazing experience to, as Brad Montague reminds us, to broaden my circles in this way. I want to end by talking about the top 10 episodes and then a little bit about my podcasting goals for 2024. Now, here's the thing I learned in doing this reflection over 100 episodes. I went into my podcast platform and looked at the statistics of the episode rankings. And I was a little surprised because this podcast started off with the sole intention of sharing a collection of 3 books every week that could help people make life better. It turns out that none of those episodes were in the top 10. It's funny to me, right? We start off with one goal and then it grows and takes on a life of its own, and you figure out what your podcast is going to be about. But I'm glad I started, and I will keep doing those 3 book episodes because I love them. But you definitely spoke about which episodes really lifted your literate love, and here they are. So I'll start with the 10th, and I will move up from there. The 10th episode, the 10th most popular episode in the top 10 episodes, was Bibliotherapy with the Keeper of Lost Things. This was episode 51, and in it, I very informally talked about what bibliotherapy means to me, and I walked you through the step-by-step process with one particular book, The Keeper of Lost Things, which, if you haven't read it yet, is an incredibly powerful book. So I talked about what bibliotherapy was, what it could accomplish, and how to do it, what to do before reading, during reading, and after reading to get the most out of your reading experience to make your actual life better, as at the same time you make your reading life better. So that was episode 51 is number 10. And number 9 is The Power of Middle Grade Novels with Anne Braden. We have a lot of children's literature fans on this podcast. I hear from you often. Another reason why I started the Kid Lit Love podcast. But this was such a wonderful episode because it was me pretty much fangirling all over Anne because all 3 of her novels have had a personally powerful impact on me as an adult. And so we talked about all 3 of those novels, one of which was recently published, and what our hopes were for just middle grade writing in general. Next up, number 8 is titled All Things Morning Pages, and that was episode 58. And it's exactly what you would expect. In it, I talked about my morning page practice, what it is, where I learned it, how I did it, how I modified it, how it helped, what I wrote about, and what my goals were. A lot of us in this community want to write more, and morning pages are a very specific kind of notebooking writing. I do actually plan to update this episode in 2024 because my morning page practice has started shifting again. And so it will be fun to update that and hopefully get some recommendations on how your morning pages or your anytime pages may have changed too. Number 7. This was one of my favorites, and so I was so glad that it was one of your favorites too. It was titled Find Your Journaling Path with Christy Zimmer. and it was episode number 50. Christy Zimmer makes the most amazing journaling pages, notebook printables, whatever you want to call them. They are these pages. Oh, they just invite you to reflect. There's lots of white space and there is lots of color and shapes and joy on the page. And you can't help but want to start writing. You could print them out and write right on them and keep them in a special binder, or you could just use them as prompts for your own regular old notebook. Either way, Christy and I had a pretty wonderful conversation about the power of reflection and the ways we can bring it to our notebook. And side note, even though it's not in the top 10, we did come back together for a second episode and we talked about a specific journaling method about journaling about our reading rules and how those reading rules translated to our actual life. Number 6. Number 6 is from episode 52. I'm seeing a trend. You liked all of the episodes in the 50s. Episode 52 was titled, Yes, You Can, Self-Publishing with Wendy Reed. Wendy is a fellow educator and literacy coach who has just dove into the self-publishing world with gusto and has shared her journey along the way. She has created picture books, notebooks, planners, all of the things that I would love to do. I was living vicariously through Wendy. We talked all about self-publishing, how it works, how to do it, how do you get the formatting right, how do you get your illustrations, how do you actually put it on a platform. We talked about all the things, and if you're interested, not only does she give away a lot of this information in episode 52, but she also offers courses periodically to help others who want to do the same. I heard a lot of comments from people about this episode that it was so inspiring because many of us have a secret dream to do just that. So if that's you, head on back to episode 52 and take a look at Wendy's self-publishing journey. Now, up next, we are moving into the top 5. The 5th most popular episode is episode 37, my 2023 notebook stack. This one was such fun to make. If you know me, you know I have notebooks and you know I have too many notebooks. And if you also know me, you know I think that's okay. I have notebooks for all sorts of reasons. A morning page notebook, a professional notebook, a notebook I put in my car, a notebook for quotes, a notebook for gratitude, my one-a-day notebook, my podcast planner. I have a stack of notebooks around me at all times. And in this episode, I just very candidly talked about all of the notebooks in my stack. I described the physical nature of the notebook, what it looked like, how it was bound together, what the lines were like, how the paper felt, and then I talked about each purpose I had for my notebook as well. This will definitely be a repeat in 2024. And spoiler alert, I've been trying to think if going to an everything notebook might be for me. So one notebook with all of the things instead of a stack of 8, which is what I had for 2023. The jury's still out on that one, so you're going to have to wait to find out what my 2024 stack is. Now, the 4th episode is from episode 65, 5 fresh notebook experiments. In this episode, I talked about how I tend to get stuck in a rut in my notebooking, especially my morning page notebooking. I tend to write about the same things over and over, and it doesn't feel good all the time, right? Especially if I'm complaining or just doing some sort of diary kind of entry. I want my notebook to serve me well. And that means I have to push my notebook limits just like I might push the circles of my actual life. So in this episode, I talked about 5 notebook experiments from the super simple to the prompted that you might try for your notebook. And I got a lot of wonderful comments on these, that these were just super easy yet fresh things to try to breathe a little new life into your notebooking. Now, episode 3 is similar. Episode 3 is special to me because it was or I should say, the third ranked episode was special to me because I got a comment from someone who I had never known, who was not in my podcasting or previous world, who thanked me for sharing it and how it helped make their mental health better. It was one of the best gifts I could have ever gotten in relation to the podcast. It was episode 48, and it was titled Journaling for Mental Health. And I talked about the ways I use my own notebook for therapy, and I gave a couple of simple ideas for how it could help you. For example, one of them being the brain dump, where you just list everything and anything that is on your mind until you simply cannot think of anything else left to write on the page. Then you take a highlighter and you highlight those items you have control over. Sometimes it may be a lot of things to highlight. Sometimes it might not be any at all, other than one or two things. That's okay. After you highlight what you have control over, you circle or star one of them that you could do something right now to make life better. It was that prompt that sent someone to my inbox with a huge thank you because I helped turn their day around and then subsequently their mental health wellness for a little while after that. It was so special to me. And that's why I'm so glad that it made the top 3. So that was episode 48, Journaling for Mental Health. The second most popular podcast is with a fellow book blogger. This is the episode with Jules from the Literary Lifestyle, and she came on to talk about 3 Gilmore Girls books. She has this entire list of hundreds of books that have ever been mentioned in any capacity on Gilmore Girls, which is one of my favorite series that I love to watch and rewatch again and again with my daughter. She brought to that episode 3 books that she thought listeners would like from that list of a couple of hundred. We talked about those books. We talked about Gilmore Girls. We talked about her Gilmore Girls book club. We just had a really great time. I mean, when 2 book bloggers, or I should say one book blogger, one podcaster gets together, you end up having a lot of books that go on your TBR list. That was a really wonderful conversation for me because I look up to Jules in this space. Her website was one that I have enjoyed for a really long time, and I tried to use as a model for how I might structure my own because I loved hers so much. And so for her to come onto the podcast and talk to me about books, that was a really wonderful day. All right, we are up to the first episode, not the first episode, the number 1 ranked episode. And the number 1 ranked episode made me smile because it was a person who was on my Pinch Me, I can't believe I'm having her on the podcast guest list. This was episode 85, titled The Pleasure and Power of Planning with Sarah Hart Unger. I mentioned her earlier in the podcast. She is a podcaster of Best Laid Plans. And that podcast is all about planning. The best planners to buy, the best planners for what your planning purpose is. In her opening, she talks about, in her podcast, everything is about planning or is planning adjacent. So there may be goal setting episodes. There may be episodes about planning your day, your month, your week, your year, your quarter. I have just loved this because she has let me dive deep into the world of planners and agendas, and especially really good paper and really good writing utensils. And it really showed me that we can have this little niche of a passion and other people do too. And now all of the planners are uniting around her podcast. And it was such a wonderful experience to have her on mine. So we talked about the power of planning, whether that's in a planner or in a notebook or whatever way works for you, and how doing that frees up a lot of time to do more of what you love. And in this case of the podcast is likely more reading, more writing, or more learning about whatever you are curious about. So that was a really wonderful episode, and I am thrilled it was the top. So there you have it, the top 10 episodes of the there we go, tripping over my words, of the Get Literate podcast so far. None of them being any of my 3 books episodes, but that's okay because these are the episodes that have pushed my own circles and have made life better. And I'm hoping because you listen to them and love them too, that it's done the same for you. So now, what about the next 100 episodes? What are some goals that I have with the podcast moving forward? Well, number one, my biggest goal is to simply do more of the same, but grow my audience. As I said, the best part of this podcast is the community that's forming around it. Whether I talk to people on social media, in the comments, in the DMs, in my Patreon community, we've really developed a special little community around reading and writing. And I would love that community and this listenership around the podcast to grow. Now, I've got some of my own learning to figure out how exactly the best way to grow a podcast is. But in my heart, I know it just means doing more of what I love every week, reading and writing, and sharing it with you and putting it out there and encouraging others to share the episodes with others that they think might enjoy it. I do plan to continue my alternate structure of 1 episode focused on reading and 1 episode focused on writing. I still hope to bring in authors and other bookish and notebookish people, but I'm also pushing my own boundaries a bit and exploring some new concepts and how to better connect around those concepts with others. So in the next 100 episodes, you can expect more episodes on something close to my heart, which is bibliotherapy. And remember that new term I created for myself, bookology. What is bookology? It's the study of books and reading, writing and notebooks mixed together with some mindfulness and creativity to make life better. I want every episode of 2024 and every episode of the next 100 episodes to embody that spirit that reading and writing can make life better. Whether that's a solo episode, an episode with an author, with a book I think you need to know about, or other bookish people doing their thing to bring reading and writing to life in their own lives, that's what I'm going to be focusing on. You can also expect a new course from me in 2024. It will be a self-paced journey for you to dive into the idea of restorative reading. Kind of like restorative yoga, this is a special kind of reading to make life better. We'll talk about what it is and how to do it and what the practices are so that you can grow your own restorative reading practice too. And then, spoiler alert, I do have big, giant, grand plans to offer a bookish retreat over the summer. I'm putting it out into the universe so that you can hold me to it. And I know some Get Literate Patreon members who are not going to let me forget. But that is a big idea on my radar that I would love to bring to life. So basically, over the next 100 episodes, I'm just going to lean into this idea of bookology and sharing reading and writing with others and connecting with as many people in the process that I can to make life bigger and better. Gretchen Rubin has this wonderful saying to choose the bigger life. And this podcast has helped me choose a bigger life in so many ways that I wouldn't have enough time to talk about them in a single episode. So this is a big thank you again. Thank you to all of the guests who have been on the podcast, to the authors who have told their stories and allowed me to learn from them, and to all of you who are listening right now. If you have something you would like to see me talk about on the Get Literate podcast in the coming year, I would love for you to tell me. You can comment on the social media post for this episode on your favorite social media platform. You can DM me in that social media platform. You could send me an email to stephanieaffinito@gmail.com, or just click that little audio message button on your favorite podcast platform, and you can send me a direct message that way. What kind of episodes would you like to see? Which authors would you like to have on? What kinds of books would you want me to explore? What's going on in your writing life that you'd want me to tackle with you? What do you want to learn about? What are you curious about? All of those comments I would love to have in my inbox. And if you do, I'll put you in the entry to win a little bit of bookish bling as a celebration. You'll notice on my social media feeds that I'm giving away a couple of things this week to celebrate episode 100, and giving me your feedback on the podcast automatically enters you into that celebration. So from me to you, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart to making the Get Literate podcast such a success. I love it. I love the spirit of it, and I can't wait to keep going in 2024 for the next 100 episodes. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you inside the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. Plus, if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, bibliotherapy book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much, much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.